Somebody told you that you need space to grow real food, and that one lie has been costing you harvests for years. Not acres, not a raised bed, not even a dedicated garden corner. 2 square feet, the size of a welcome mat, the size of a carry-on suitcase laid flat on the ground. And from that space, using materials you probably already own, people are pulling 50 pounds of food every single season without tilling, without chemicals, without hauling bags of expensive soil amendment from a store that profits every time you walk through its doors. They call it the lazy vertical system. And the reason you've never heard of it isn't because it's new, it's because it's old. Ancient, actually. And what's old, what's free, and what makes corporate supply chains irrelevant tends to have a funny way of going quiet. But here's what they don't want you connecting. The moment you stop needing space, you stop needing everything they're selling to fill it. And that changes the math for a lot of people who make a lot of money off your frustration. So stay with me. Because by the end of this, you're going to look at that bare wall, that forgotten fence, that neglected 2 feet of concrete edge, and see 50 pounds of food that's been waiting for you all along. The moment you walk into any garden center, you're being sold a story. And the story goes like this. Growing food is complicated. It requires the right soil mix, the right bed dimensions, the right amendment schedule, the right spacing, the right everything. And all of that right stuff, conveniently, is available for purchase right here, right now, in this exact aisle. Think about how much money the average enthusiastic new gardener spends before they've grown a single thing. Raised bed kits, bags of premium potting mix, pH test kits, fertilizer spikes, irrigation setups, grow lights for starting seeds indoors. We're talking $300, $400, $500 before the first seed goes into the ground. And what's the single biggest assumption baked into every single product in that store? That you need ground, horizontal ground, flat, wide, open, measured by the square foot ground. The industry built itself on that assumption. Wider beds need more soil. More soil means more bags. More bags mean more money. The entire model collapses the second you point your growing space upward. So nobody in that store is going to suggest you do that. Nobody's going to hand you the system that makes most of what they're selling completely unnecessary. You've probably walked out of a garden center feeling defeated, like you don't have the right setup, or the right yard, or the right conditions. I want you to understand that feeling wasn't an accident. It was the design. About 4,000 years ago, in a city that shouldn't have been able to grow anything, they were feeding thousands of people from structures no bigger than a modern parking spot. The hanging gardens, whether you believe every detail of the legend or not, point to something real. Ancient people understood that water, weight, and vertical layers could do what horizontal ground could not. But you don't have to go back to Babylon to find this. Look at the Aztec chinampas, floating garden systems built by layering organic material upward from water, producing food yields so extraordinary that the Spanish explorers who saw them refused to believe what they were looking at. They wrote it down as sorcery because they had no other framework for it. Come forward a few centuries to the mountain farming communities of Southeast Asia, where terraced vertical growing on slopes too steep for traditional planting was feeding entire generations. Same principle. Stack the layers, direct the water, let gravity do the work you'd otherwise be paying for. The Amish communities of Pennsylvania and Ohio quietly adapted these principles for the modern homestead. Grandmothers who'd never heard the word permaculture were stacking clay, mulch, and kitchen scraps around fence posts and pulling more tomatoes from those structures than their neighbors were getting from full garden beds 3 times the size. It wasn't science to them. It was just what you did when you didn't have room to waste and didn't have money to throw at a problem. This knowledge moved mouth to mouth, grandmother to daughter, neighbor to neighbor. It didn't need a store. It didn't need a product. And that, right there, is exactly the problem. Here's something worth thinking about. The garden industry makes exactly $0 when you grow 50 pounds of food from 2 square feet of space you already have. $0 on soil. You're building your own. 0 on raised beds. You're using vertical structure instead. 0 on irrigation systems. This method retains water naturally, often cutting your watering needs in half. 0 on fertilizer. The system feeds itself. When a method is this self-contained, it doesn't generate repeat customers. And businesses that depend on repeat customers, on you coming back every spring to reload on amendments and inputs, have a quiet but very real incentive to make sure this approach never trends. Never shows up in the garden center pamphlets, never gets recommended by the YouTube channels those brands happen to sponsor. I'm not saying there's a meeting somewhere where executives decided to suppress vertical growing. I'm saying follow the money, and you'll understand why what works best isn't always what gets promoted most. The garden store needs you to believe growing food is complicated. The lazy vertical makes it simple. Those two things cannot both be good for business. And honestly, it makes me frustrated. Not at any one person, but at the decades of perfectly good growing seasons that got lost. Because people thought they needed more than they had. This isn't magic, and it isn't a trick. It's just physics that most gardeners were never taught. Here's the core principle. Plants don't actually need soil. They need what's inside soil: water, nutrients, oxygen at the root zone, structural support. That's it. The dirt itself is just the delivery system. And when you understand that, you realize you can build a better delivery system from almost nothing. Think of your growing structure like a sponge wrapped around a spine. The spine is your vertical support, a post, a fence, a wall, whatever you have. The sponge is your growing medium, layered organic material that holds moisture, releases nutrients slowly, and gives roots exactly the environment they're looking for. Now tilt that sponge upright and something interesting happens. Water doesn't just sit at the bottom anymore. It moves through the layers, depositing nutrients as it goes. The surface area exposed to sunlight multiplies. Root zones that would compete for space in a flat bed now stack neatly, each layer feeding the next. A flat 2 square foot bed gives you 2 square feet of growing surface. A vertical structure built in that same footprint, even one that's only 5 feet tall, gives you 10, 12, sometimes 15 square feet of productive surface area. That's the multiplier. That's where 50 pounds comes from. And here's the part skeptics always want answered. Won't it dry out? Actually, no, not if you layer correctly. The organic material in the system acts like a slow-release reservoir. The outer layer sheds excess rain. The inner layers hold moisture for days. I know it sounds too good to be true, but this is the same principle your compost pile runs on. Biology is old. The application is just new to most of us. All right, let's get into the actual system, because this is where it stops being theory and starts being dinner. You need 4 things: a vertical support structure, a layering material, a planting medium, and something to hold it together. That's it. No receipts required for any of it. For your support structure, you're looking for anything that stands upright and can handle some weight. A wooden fence post works perfectly, ideally something about as tall as your shoulder. A length of PVC pipe driven into the ground works. A cattle panel bent into a half circle and staked at both ends works, and gives you a bonus arch shape that dramatically increases your surface area. Even a section of old ladder leaned against a wall will do the job. Whatever you have, whatever costs you nothing. For your layering material, this is where the lazy and lazy vertical earns its name. Cardboard from any delivery box, straw from a feed store or a neighbor's bale, fallen leaves, wood chips from a tree trimmer. And if you don't know this already, most tree trimming companies will dump a full load of fresh chips at your address, for free, just to avoid disposal fees. Kitchen scraps work beautifully in the lower layers. Newspaper, torn up and wet, fills gaps perfectly. Now here's the layering sequence. Start at the base of your support structure with a thick layer of cardboard directly on the ground. Get it wet. This kills the grass underneath, stops weeds from pushing up, and starts decomposing into soil within weeks. Next, pile your coarsest material, wood chips, straw, in a layer about as deep as a standard paperback book lying flat. Wet it. Then add a thinner layer of your finer organic material. Leaf mold, kitchen scraps, shredded newspaper. Wet that too. Alternate these layers, moving upward, compressing gently between each one. Your planting pockets go into this structure at an angle. Think of tucking plants into the side of a hillside, not dropping them into a flat hole. Angle each pocket slightly downward so it sheds water inward toward the root zone rather than outward away from it. Space your pockets about the width of your hand apart. Strawberries, lettuce, herbs, spinach, kale, all of these root shallow and thrive in this configuration. Tomatoes and cucumbers go at the base where the root zone is deepest. Once you've planted, water the entire structure slowly from the top. You want the water to work its way down through every layer. In the first week, do this every other day. After that, touch the outer surface. If it feels like a wrung-out sponge, dry on the surface but damp an inch in, you're in perfect shape. Water only when the outer layer starts feeling papery. In 2 weeks, you'll see roots beginning to anchor into the layers below their starting pocket. In 4 weeks, leaf growth will start accelerating noticeably as the decomposing layers beneath begin releasing nutrients. At the 6-week mark, most people see the moment they describe as the system waking up. Growth that feels faster than anything they have experienced in a flatbed. The lazy vertical isn't picky, but some plants were practically born for this system. Strawberries are almost unfairly well suited. They trail down the structure naturally. Their shallow roots love the upper layers, and a single 2 square foot vertical column can support 20 to 30 plants, producing pound after pound across a full season. Lettuce and salad greens are your workhorses. Cut and come again, varieties will regrow from the same pocket 3 or 4 times before needing replacement. Fresh basil, parsley, and cilantro thrive in the mid layers and benefit from the slightly drier surface conditions. For heavier producers, position cherry tomato varieties at the base and let them climb your support structure. A single cherry tomato plant in a well-layered vertical system will outproduce a flatbed plant. Significantly, I've seen people hit 8 to 10 pounds from one plant in one season. Pole beans love to climb. Cucumbers trained upward through the structure will set fruit prolifically. Kale, once established in the mid layers, will produce continuously with almost no input from you whatsoever. What won't work well? Anything with a very large, deep taproot. Carrots, parsnips, large beets, these need depth that the structure doesn't prioritize. Save those for another bed. Everything else is fair game. I know 50 pounds sounds like a number someone pulled out of thin air, so let me break down exactly where it comes from. 20 strawberry plants in a single 2 square foot vertical column, producing conservatively, will give you 8 to 10 pounds across a season. 3 cherry tomato plants at the base, another 12 to 15 pounds minimum. 2 cucumber plants trained vertically, 8 to 10 pounds. Continuous lettuce harvest from 4 to 6 pockets, cut 3 times each, 6 to 8 pounds. Herbs and kale filling remaining pockets, 3 to 5 pounds of usable harvest. Add it up. On the conservative end, that's 37 pounds. On a healthy, well-managed structure with a decent growing season, you're at 50, sometimes beyond it. And the cost? If you start with materials you already have, cardboard from packages, leaves from the yard, kitchen scraps, the actual cash outlay for the system is zero. If you buy a cheap post and a bag of straw, you're at maybe $12, $15. That's a one-time cost. The structure feeds itself forward, improving each season as the lower layers continue composting into rich soil. Year 2 is more productive than year 1. Year 3 is more productive than year 2. Compare that to $500 in garden center supplies growing the same volume in a traditional setup. And that's $500 every year, because the inputs deplete and need replacing. The math isn't close. One of the best things about this system is that it doesn't care where you live. If you're in a hot, dry climate, the layered structure's moisture retention becomes even more valuable. The inner layers stay damp far longer than exposed flat soil would, dramatically reducing your watering burden during summer heat. In colder climates, the decomposing organic mass inside the structure actually generates a small but measurable amount of heat. Experienced vertical growers in northern states consistently report planting 2 to 3 weeks earlier than their flatbed neighbors because of this. No yard, this scales to a balcony. A single vertical structure in a large container, stood against a railing, can support a meaningful herb and lettuce garden in less than 3 square feet of floor space. Live somewhere with brutal wind? Position the structure against a wall, which solves the exposure problem and adds a reflective heat benefit at the same time. Once you've built one and watched it perform, the instinct is always to scale. And scaling is simple. You're not redesigning anything, you're just repeating the build. A row of 5 vertical structures along a fence line creates a living wall that produces food at a scale most people associate with a serious garden plot. Do that in 10 feet of fence length, and you've built something genuinely remarkable out of materials that were either free or nearly free. Troubleshoot as you go. If your outer layer is drying out too fast, add a thin top dressing of straw after watering. If you see yellowing in the lower leaves, the system is asking for a nitrogen boost. A thin layer of coffee grounds or fresh grass clippings worked into the top of the structure will move that downward within 2 weeks. If a planting pocket seems slow to establish, angle it slightly more toward the inside of the structure to give the roots better contact with the moist interior layers. You came into this video thinking you needed more space, and you're leaving it knowing that was never true. What you have, the wall, the fence, the corner of a balcony, the 2 feet of forgotten ground next to your back door, was always enough. The system was always available. The knowledge existed. It's been working for thousands of years across dozens of civilizations, in conditions far harder than most of us will ever face. It was just inconvenient for the people who needed you to keep buying what they were selling. No raised beds required, no bags of expensive soil mix, no complicated irrigation, no chemicals, no special tools. No space you don't already have. This is growing food the way it worked before it got complicated on purpose. Here's your one action for today. Go find 3 things. A vertical support of any kind, a piece of cardboard, and whatever organic material is nearest to you right now, leaves, straw, kitchen scraps, wood chips. Stack them in sequence, wet each layer, and you have the beginning of a structure that will be feeding you within weeks. That's it. That's the whole start. Do it before tonight. Because the season is moving whether you build this system or not, and 50 pounds of food doesn't happen on its own. It happens because you decided today was the day you stopped waiting for more room and started using what you already had. If you want more forgotten systems like this one, methods that work because they're built on physics and biology instead of products and profits, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what's coming next. I'm going through these techniques one by one, and each one is simpler and more powerful than the last. Drop a comment and let me know what you're planning to grow in your first vertical structure. I read every single one. They can sell you the idea that you need more space, more soil, more products, more permission. But they can't make that true. You have what you need. You have what you've always had. 2 square feet, a little patience, and knowledge. They spent a long time hoping you'd never find. It's yours now. Go use it.